raised them. I love them. And then my own son tried to take them away from me. My name is not important right now. What matters is that I'm 63 years old. I live in a two-bedroom house in Macon, Georgia, and for the past 11 years, I have been the only parent my two grandchildren have ever really known. It started on a Tuesday. I remember because I had just gotten home from my shift at the parts warehouse. I was still working back then, hadn't hit retirement age yet, and my son's car was already in the driveway. That was unusual. He lived 40 minutes away in Atlanta, and he never just dropped by. I walked in and found him sitting at my kitchen table with his girlfriend, a woman named Serena I had only met twice before. She had this way of looking at you that made you feel like you were standing in the way of something she wanted. My son Nathan was 31 then. He had his mother's eyes and his grandfather's restlessness, which is a combination that never serves a person well. He'd been in and out of trouble since his 20s. Nothing violent, mostly poor decisions. The kind that pile up until they become a life. He'd had two kids with a woman named April, who had left the picture entirely by the time the youngest was 8 months old. So it had always been Nathan, struggling, and me, helping where I could. He looked up when I came in and said, "Dad, I need a favor." That was how it always started with him. He explained that Serena had a job opportunity in Phoenix, a real one, he said, emphasizing the word like, I might not believe him. A management position at a logistics company. They were going to go out there, get settled, and then send for the kids. He just needed me to watch them for a few weeks. Lily was 4 years old. Connor was 7. I looked at those two kids sitting on my living room floor playing with Legos, and I said yes. Of course I said yes. What grandfather wouldn't? Nathan left the duffel bag with some of their clothes. He hugged both kids longer than usual, which I didn't think much of at the time. He shook my hand, which he hadn't done since his high school graduation, and he and Serena drove away. That was 11 years ago. The first month he called every few days. Said they were still getting settled. Said Phoenix was more expensive than expected. Said he'd send money when he could. He sent $200 once in an envelope with no note. That was the only money I ever received. The calls got further apart, then they stopped. By the time Connor was 9, I had enrolled both kids in school, gotten them on my health insurance through my employer, opened savings accounts for each of them, and filed for legal guardianship. The family court process was straightforward because Nathan didn't respond to a single document. He didn't contest anything. He didn't appear at the hearing. The judge, a soft-spoken woman named Judge Ardmore, looked over the paperwork and said to me, "Sir, it's clear these children have a stable home." She granted me full legal guardianship that afternoon. I drove home and made the kids spaghetti for dinner and didn't tell them what had happened because they were too young to understand, and because some things you protect children from, as long as you can. Years pass the way years do when you're raising kids, fast and slow at the same time, exhausting and beautiful in equal measure. Connor turned into a serious, quiet kid who loved building computers. Lily became the kind of girl who argued with her teachers about everything and was usually right. I retired from the warehouse at 61, took on a part-time bookkeeping job to stay busy, and built a life around those two kids that I had not planned, but would not have traded for anything on earth. My neighbor, a Vietnam veteran named Floyd, who walked with a cane and had strong opinions about everything, became something like a co-parent to them without either of us saying so. He taught Connor how to change brake pads. He sat with Lily on my front porch on the night she couldn't sleep and told her stories about his late wife. Floyd was the kind of man who showed up. He had learned, he told me once, that showing up was the whole thing. I kept an envelope in the fireproof box in my closet. Inside that envelope was every document I had accumulated over 11 years. Guardianship papers, school enrollment records, medical records, letters from teachers, photos, hundreds of photos. I had started saving it all after a year or two when I began to understand that Nathan was not coming back. I did not know why I was saving it all. Some instinct told me to. I saved everything. The first sign of trouble came on a Wednesday morning in March, 11 years after Nathan had driven away. Connor was 18 by then, a senior in high school. Lily was 15. I was in the kitchen making coffee when Connor came downstairs holding his phone with an expression I had never seen on him before. "Grandpa," he said, "I got a message from my dad." I set down the coffee mug. Nathan had found Connor on social media. His message was friendly, chatty, like a man reconnecting after a long trip rather than an 11-year disappearance. He said he'd been through some hard times. He said he thought about the kids often. He said he was back in Georgia now, living in Savannah, and he'd love to see them. I told Connor the decision was his. I meant it. He was 18. I was not going to tell him how to feel about his father. What I did not know was that Serena was no longer in the picture. What I did not know was that Nathan had remarried a woman named Donna, whose family had money, real money, the kind that comes with lawyers on retainer. And what I did not know, not yet, was that Donna had convinced Nathan that reclaiming his children would be the first step toward reclaiming his life. The visit happened on a Saturday. Nathan showed up alone, thinner than I remembered, with the particular energy of a man who has rehearsed something. He hugged Connor, who allowed it stiffly. He hugged Lily, who stepped back before he could complete the motion. He sat in my living room and talked for 40 minutes about Phoenix and mistakes and second chances. He cried at one point. Real tears, I think, though I have learned not to trust my ability to tell the difference. Before he left, he asked me quietly in the doorway if we could talk about the kids' situation. What situation? I said. Their living situation, he said. Lily's still a minor. I'm still her father. I looked at him for a long moment. Nathan and I have legal guardianship. I've had it for 9 years. He nodded like I'd confirmed something. I know, he said. Donna's looking into that. He drove away, and I stood in the doorway and felt something cold settle into my chest. 3 weeks later, 2 police officers knocked on my door. I want to stop here and tell you what that moment is like, because if you haven't experienced it, you cannot imagine it. It is 7:30 in the morning. You are in your bathrobe. You open the door, and there are 2 uniformed officers on your porch, and one of them says your full name and asks if you are who you are. The world does not spin. It goes very still. You become aware of every small physical detail, the texture of the door frame under your hand, the sound of birds in the yard, the smell of your own coffee from the kitchen behind you. One of the officers said, "Sir, we have a report of 2 minors being held at this address without parental consent." I said, "I have legal guardianship of both children." He said, "Sir, we're going to need to come inside." What followed was the longest 2 hours of my life. The officer spoke to Lily in the kitchen while I sat in the living room with the other one. I could hear her voice, controlled, careful, the way she got when she was angry and working to contain it. At one point she said clearly and firmly, "I have lived here my entire life. My grandfather is my guardian." The officer with me wrote things down and did not meet my eyes. Nathan had filed a complaint claiming I was holding Lily unlawfully. He had not mentioned Connor, who was 18 and therefore legally irrelevant to the claim. He had not mentioned the guardianship. His lawyer, a man I would later learn had a reputation for aggressive family law tactics, had filed the complaint before Nathan had even attempted to pursue guardianship modification through proper channels. It was a pressure move. It was designed to frighten me. It almost worked. When the officers finally left, satisfied that Lily was safe, that she wanted to be there, that I had the paperwork, I sat down at my kitchen table and put my head in my hands. I was 63 years old. I had raised this man's children for 11 years. I had gone to every school play, every parent-teacher conference, every doctor's appointment. I had learned how to do a teenage girl's hair because nobody else was going to do it. I had stayed up nights when Lily had a fever. I had driven Connor to 3 different college visits last fall, and now I was sitting in my kitchen having just been questioned by police in front of my own grandchild. Floyd appeared at my back door an hour later. He had seen the police cars. He didn't ask questions. He just came in, poured himself a cup of my coffee, and sat across from me. "Tell me," he said. I told him. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Where's that envelope you keep?" I looked at him. "The one in your closet," he said. "I've heard you mention it. Get it." I got it. Floyd went through every document in that envelope while I watched. He organized them into 2 piles with the efficiency of a man who had once had to organize his own survival. When he finished, he tapped the larger pile and said, "This is your case, right here. 11 years in a box." He paused a minute and said, "But Nathan's lawyer is going to make this ugly before it gets better. You need to understand that." "I know," I said. "Do you have a lawyer?" I didn't. Floyd had a daughter-in-law who had gone through a custody battle 2 years prior. He made a call that afternoon. By Monday morning, I had a consultation scheduled with an attorney named Mr. Okafor who worked family law out of an office in downtown Macon. He was thorough, calm, and direct, in the way that good lawyers are direct. Not reassuring exactly, but honest, which I needed more than reassurance. Mr. Okafor reviewed my documents and said, "You're in a strong position legally. The guardianship is valid and long-standing. The child has expressed her wishes clearly. What we need to be prepared for is the argument that circumstances have changed, that the biological father is now stable and wants to be involved." "He abandoned them," I said. "Yes," Mr. Okafor said, "and we will make that very clear." What happened next, I was not prepared for. Nathan's lawyer sent a formal letter claiming that my original guardianship had been obtained improperly, that Nathan had never been formally notified of the proceedings. This was untrue. I had documentation proving the notification had been sent to his last known address. But the letter also included something else, affidavits from two people claiming that I had, in their observation, isolated the children from contact with their father. One of the affidavits was from a woman I didn't recognize at all. The other was from a man named Pete, who had lived 2 doors down from me for 6 years before moving away. Pete and I had never been close, but we had been neighborly. I had helped him move a refrigerator once. I called Floyd and read him the affidavit. He was quiet. Then he said, "Pete moved to Savannah." I hadn't known that. "Same town Nathan's living in now," Floyd said. The implications settled over me slowly, the way cold water rises. Nathan's lawyer was building a case not on facts, but on narrative. The narrative was unstable grandfather, isolated children, father trying to do right. The affidavits were not proof of anything. They were designed to create doubt, to make a judge look at me differently before I'd said a word. Mr. Okafor was not surprised. He had seen this approach before. He told me we were going to counter with something that could not be questioned, the children themselves. Connor had already written a statement. He was 18. His voice carried legal weight. His statement was 2 pages long and described, in plain factual language, 11 years of a grandfather who had been present for every significant moment of his life, and a father who had not been present for a single one. Lily was 15. Her voice mattered too, but differently. A guardian ad litem would be appointed to represent her interests independently. Mr. Okafor had already filed the request. But there was still the matter of the false affidavits, and Nathan's lawyer was now pushing for an emergency custody hearing on the grounds that Lily was in an unstable living situation. The phrase made me physically ill. Floyd, who had been sitting with me through most of this, said one evening, "Nathan came back to town in January. You said he contacted Connor in March. That's 2 months in between. What was he doing for 2 months?" "I didn't know." "I might," Floyd said. What Floyd did over the next week, I only learned about afterward, and only partially. He had friends in Savannah, men he'd known since his Army days who still lived there, still knew people, still had eyes and ears in a community the way men of a certain generation do. What he found out was that Nathan had, in those 2 months before contacting Connor, hired a private investigator. The investigator's report, which Floyd obtained through channels I have never asked him to explain, documented my home, my routines, my relationship with the kids. It was an entirely normal picture of an entirely normal home. But Nathan's lawyer had cherry-picked 2 observations from the report and used them out of context in the affidavits. The PI's full report, however, told a different story than the cherry-picked version, and Floyd had a copy. I called Mr. Okafor. He was quiet for a long moment on the phone. Then he said, "How did your neighbor get this?" "I genuinely don't know," I said. Another pause. "It's legally obtained information from a third party. We can use it." I could hear him writing. "This changes things significantly." The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in April. I drove myself. Floyd offered to come, but I told him no. I needed him available for the kids if anything went sideways, and he understood that without my having to explain it further. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Nathan was already there with his lawyer when I arrived. He was wearing a suit that looked new. He did not look at me when I walked in. His lawyer presented the case as expected. Reformed father, stable new life, concerned about children being raised in isolation by an aging grandparent. He used the word aging 3 times. I watched the judge, a man this time, Judge Calloway, heavy-set, methodical, who had clearly read the file before we started, because he kept glancing at it rather than at the attorneys. When Mr. Okafor stood up, He was unhurried. He presented the guardianship documents. He presented 11 years of school records, medical records, tax filings showing the children as dependents. He presented Connor's written statement. He presented the guardian ad litem's preliminary assessment, which had been completed 2 days prior. The guardian ad litem had interviewed Lily for 90 minutes, had spoken with 2 of her teachers and her school counselor, and had submitted a report stating clearly that Lily was thriving, that she had a strong and healthy relationship with her grandfather, and that she had expressed clearly that she did not wish to change her living situation. Then Mr. Okafor presented the private investigator's full report. Nathan's lawyer stood up immediately. There was a brief, sharp exchange that I could not entirely follow. Judge Calloway read the document in silence for what felt like a very long time. When he looked up, he looked at Nathan's lawyer. "Counselor," he said, "2 of the affidavits submitted in support of this claim appear to be based on a selective reading of this same investigative report. The full report contradicts the conclusions those affidavits were drawn to support." He set the document down. "I'd like to understand how that happened." Nathan's lawyer began to speak. The judge held up one hand. The silence in that courtroom was the best sound I had ever heard. What followed was not a dramatic collapse. It was quieter than that, which is how justice usually works, when it actually works. Nathan's petition was denied. Judge Calloway noted in his ruling that the existing guardianship was well established, that the minor child's clearly expressed wishes aligned with her circumstances, and that the petitioner had provided no substantive evidence of unfitness on the part of the current guardian. He also noted, with a particular choice of words, that the manner in which the petition had been filed raised concerns about the petitioner's good faith, and he referred the matter of the misleading affidavits for further review. Nathan's lawyer gathered his papers and left quickly. Nathan sat for a moment after the lawyer left, alone at the table, and I looked at him. My son, whom I had also once raised, whom I had also once loved without condition, and I felt something that was not anger and was not relief. It was something older and sadder than either of those things. Grief, maybe. For the father, he hadn't been. For the son, he could have been. He left without speaking to me. I walked out into the April sunlight and called Floyd. "Done?" he said. "Done," I said. He exhaled. "Good. Come home. Lily made something. She's been in the kitchen for an hour and won't tell me what it is." I drove home through Macon with all 4 windows down. It was the kind of spring day that makes you feel like the world has a little generosity left in it after all. When I pulled into the driveway, Floyd was on the porch. He stood up when he saw me and nodded once. No handshake, no speech. That was Floyd. Inside, Lily had made pound cake from a recipe she found in the box of my late wife's index cards. She had flour on her shirt, and she was trying very hard to appear casual about the whole thing. "It might be a little dry," she said. It was not dry. It was perfect. Connor came down from his room, and the 4 of us sat at my kitchen table in the late afternoon light, and I thought about the word family. How it is not a thing you are given, necessarily, but a thing you build, piece by piece, out of ordinary days, out of school pickups and sick nights and arguments about curfews and dinners that go cold while everyone's still talking. You build it out of showing up, which is the whole thing, as Floyd once told me. I have that envelope still. The fireproof box is back in the closet. The papers are back inside, all of them, including the court ruling from that Thursday in April. I don't think I'll ever throw it away. Some things you keep, because they are proof. Not proof for anyone else, not anymore, but proof for yourself. On the days when the world feels indifferent and you need to remember that you held on, and it mattered. And they are okay. They are okay. That is the whole story, and it is enough. I've thought a lot about what made Nathan come back. Not in a bitter way, more the way you turn a strange object over in your hands, trying to understand what it is. He wasn't a bad person. I want to be clear about that. He was a person who had made so many small surrenders over so many years that eventually he had surrendered the most important thing a man can have, his own children, without even fully registering what he'd done. And then someone handed him a story about being wronged, and he picked it up because it was easier than the truth. That's what I kept coming back to in the months after the hearing. The cost of the easy version of things. Nathan took the easy road when he drove to Phoenix. He took it when he stopped calling. He took it again when his new wife's lawyer handed him a grievance to file instead of asking him to sit with his own conscience. Every one of those choices had a consequence that landed somewhere, on Connor, on Lily, on me, on his own life. That's not punishment from the universe or anything like that. It's just the plain arithmetic of how a life adds up. What I know is this: the choices I made added up too, just differently. I chose to get the guardianship even when it was inconvenient and expensive. I chose to keep the envelope. I chose to call Mr. Okafor on a Monday morning when part of me wanted to just give up and let the lawyers sort it out. Those weren't heroic decisions. They were just the decisions in front of me, and I made them because I understood that the children needed someone who would think clearly even when things felt impossible. Floyd used to say that a man's character isn't the big moments. It's whether he shows up on a Tuesday with nothing special happening. I think that's right. Connor and Lily didn't need me to be extraordinary. They needed me to be steady, to pay attention, to keep the paperwork, to ask Floyd for help when I couldn't see clearly on my own. Intelligence, in my experience, isn't about being the smartest person in the room. It's about knowing what you don't know and finding people who can fill the gap. And the will to keep going. That one I had to earn over and over. There were nights in those 11 years when I was tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. When I wondered if I had taken on more than a man my age was supposed to carry. But then I'd hear Lily laughing in the next room. Or I'd see Connor figuring something out on his computer with that focused look he gets. And the tiredness would shift. It didn't disappear. It just became part of the weight of something worth carrying. I don't have a tidy summary for what any of this means. Life doesn't organize itself into lessons the way we'd like. What I have is a pound cake recipe on an index card in my wife's handwriting, and a 15-year-old girl who made it because she wanted to say something she didn't have the words for yet, and an 18-year-old boy who wrote 2 pages of plain, true sentences on behalf of the grandfather who raised him. That's enough. That's more than enough.